What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Wednesday, November 1st edition of the NBA Lineup Generator Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoneyDFS. We have 13 NBA games tonight, and we're going to use the Lineup Generator tool to take a look at how lineups are looking here in the early afternoon. We are waiting on a lot of injury news. This, of course, will change the way that lineups look by the time we get to lock, but you'll get a look at how to use this tool. And if you want to use it on your own with up-to-date projections, up-to-date ownership as we get closer to lock, you can use the code listed above me on the screen or the links below, whether you're watching on YouTube or Twitter. Use code NBA Treat and get your first week of the lineup generator for just $4.99. This is the best deal you're going to find dollar-wise amongst our products. This tool, if you're not already familiar, essentially on the back end, we're still using our simulations, we're using our projections, our ownership, and then you are just receiving lineups that have shown to be plus EV based on all of our metrics. Lineups that over time you can expect to win with. So you don't have quite as much customization as you do with the more expensive Sims tool, for example, but that also means you have less room for error. It's more difficult for you to make mistakes because we're doing the work for you on the back end. So use the link below, whether you're watching on Twitter, I will tweet it after this video, or on YouTube, it's in the description. Or if you just want to go to the site, you can type it in yourself, code NBA Treat. It's at the top of the screen above my head. Now we're going to start on DraftKings here. And as a quick reminder, we are waiting on a lot of news today. We have teams on back-to-backs. We have a lot of questionable players. So stuff is going to change. And again, that's why it's important that you use that code, use this tool for yourself. You don't want to be locking in whatever shows up here at 2:30 in the afternoon, but we can take a look at how to use it and how things are looking right now. Now, I prefer using this all lineups button. If you just want to see chalky lineups, maybe you're playing smaller field stuff, that's fine. If you want more balanced lineups, more contrarian lineups, you can choose those. For me, I know that we're using simulations and everything on the back end. So I just want to have access to all of the lineups and then see what's coming up. But again, depending on what type of tournament you're playing, you can make a case for selecting a different choice. But I'm going with all lineups and I'm skipping the option to lock anybody. It's just not part of my process. I would rather let everything work itself out and see where I end up on players. So now we're going to go ahead and just select the first 20 lineups that come up, clicking the save button here. Now, remember, if you're using this on your own and you see something that you don't like, you can use the discard button. You'll just get another lineup and eventually you can save up to 20. I actually need to clear the lineups and then restart. Forgot to do that earlier, but now we cleared those and we're going to save 20 lineups with the information, the data that we have available right now. So we now have these 20 lineups, and on the right-hand side here, you can see the overall player exposures. Here, you can see the lineups that we saved. We have the projected fantasy points. We have the projected ownership, so you can kind of quickly compare that. Now, one thing that I knew was going to happen, and I see it immediately, Trendon Watford here is showing up 20% of the time. Now, this is just a weird spot where I'm pretty sure his projection is going to change as we get closer to lock, but right now we have a higher projection on him than I personally agree with. So if you do find yourself in a situation like this, I'm a pretty big advocate for trusting the tools, trusting the data, but you just find yourself in a situation like this where you're seeing a player that you really don't want that much of. I don't want 20% Trendon Watford. If you just click him here on the right-hand side, it's actually going to highlight the lineups here on the left in yellow that have him. So we can just quickly go in here, discard these 4 lineups that it's telling us have Trendon Watford. And then we can go back to get more lineups and I'm going to select the next 4 that do not have Trendon Watford in them so that we can take a look at those. The first 3 don't, and neither does the 4th. So that worked out. So now we're back to our 20 lineups. We got rid of Trendon Watford, except for one lineup where I missed it. But that's just something to keep in mind. It's a quick way that you can adjust your exposures, even if it's just there's not a player that it's not necessarily a player that you don't want to have any of, but maybe for whatever reason you're just getting a lot of a player more than you're comfortable with. That's a quick way that you can adjust your exposures by just highlighting those lineups and then dropping whichever ones you don't want and then adding some others. So that should have gotten rid of Trendon Watford, assuming I didn't misclick him again. And yeah, it looks like he's gone. So just wanted to do that. We still have Also, looking at these other players, Kevin Love was downgraded to questionable today. He's showing up 45% of the time right now. For the sake of the video, I'm just going to let that happen. But there's a pretty good chance Kevin Love disappears from this slate. As is, though, he is looking like a pretty good value there. Scrolling down a little bit, we also have Jalen Duren still in our projections. He missed shoot around today. Marvin Bagley was practicing with the starters. That's a huge piece of news. Obviously, if Duren ends up getting ruled out, you're not going to play him. But a $4,000 Marvin Bagley is going to end up, up in this range towards the top of your highest exposed guys, most likely. Very easy to see him in place of Kevin Love, for example, at 45%. So that's a huge piece of news that is likely going to break, but we haven't projected yet. So just one of many reasons why everything will look different as you get closer to lock. And again, just use the tool for yourself. $5 for your first week, and you can use it as close to lock as you would like. Now, looking at some of the individual lineups here on DraftKings, the first lineup, 270 fantasy point projection. If you compare it to some of the others, that's a relatively low projection, but it does also only have 77% aggregate ownership. So it's a relatively contrarian lineup. We're getting to Bruce Brown here at the top at only 3% owned, 3% owned Josh Giddey. Chalky shade on Sharp at small forward. No problem with that. Sub 10% Kyle Kuzma. Don't have a problem there. John Collins, solid value play, only getting 10% ownership. I like that one. Trae Young is questionable. Obviously, that's a huge piece of news as well. But if he's in, he's 10% owned. Kevin Love at 8%. Again, he's questionable. And then Bones Highland, the Clippers as a team are extremely questionable tonight. But Highland at the least should be serviceable. We're still not going to have James Harden there. They still traded everybody that they traded yesterday. So at worst, you're expecting Bones Highland to probably start again like he did last night, play somewhere around 30 minutes. But this is a back-to-back, so there's a pretty good chance that some combination of Kawhi or George or Westbrook or more than one of them end up sitting. And we know that Bones Highland is someone where if you're taking the usage of Kawhi Leonard or Paul George off the floor, Bones Highland is going to go out there and look for his shot. He's not your backup guard that is shy about shooting and he's going to just go in there and try and fit in and facilitate. He's going to shoot the ball if you're taking guys like George and Kawhi off the floor. So the Clippers in general are a big piece of news tonight that we'll have to keep an eye on. But Highland, at the very least, should be a serviceable play, if not a very, very good play, depending on who ends up getting ruled out. Next, another lineup with a 270-point projection, a little bit more popular with 100% aggregate ownership. Still nothing, too concerning there. Our third lineup here projects a lot better. We're getting about 13 extra points, still only 118% ownership. That's the nice thing about these larger 13-game slates. Ownership is still relatively modest, even if you play a chalkier lineup. Looking at this one, you have CJ McCollum pulling 12%. DeJounte Murray, our highest owned guy right now at 50%, only 7,300 in a very favorable matchup with the Wizards. If Trae Young gets ruled out, DeJounte Murray is just going to look even better. He'll also be more popular, but one way or the other, he looks like one of the better plays today. Ben Simmons on a shorthanded Brooklyn team, missing Spencer Dinwiddie. We should see the ball in Simmons' hands a lot, running point. Cam Thomas, not exactly a point guard. Dude doesn't pass. Mikal Bridges, not that type of guy either. Those guys are still going to get the bulk of the usage, but Ben Simmons should be involved even more as a facilitator today. And at 6,800, he's going to look like a really good play. He's showing up 45% of the time for us. John Collins, mentioned before, solid value option. Alperen Şengün, very high upside play, getting 20% ownership at center. Derek White, 2% owned, not a lot to say about him, a little bit overpriced, but as a contrarian option, certainly could still get there. Bogdanovic in what should be a high scoring game. A little surprised that he's getting 9% ownership. The playing time's a little bit volatile. If Trae Young is out, he certainly looks better, but either way, 4,600 for a guy with small forward eligibility that is capable of scoring like Bogdanovic is nice. And then Norman Powell, who still came off the bench last night for the shorthanded Clippers, but got plenty of playing time and would likely move into a bigger role if Paul George or Kawhi are out. So another pretty solid lineup there. Even though it's getting a little bit more ownership, does project a lot better. As far as trying to take a look to see if we're, just avoiding any of the most popular options on DraftKings right now, Jalen Green is projected for the second most ownership at 26%. We are not getting to a ton of him, only about 15%. Same goes for Jabari Smith, who is showing up 10% of the time for us, 25% of the time for the field. So those two are I think noteworthy, but we are getting to some pretty solid guys here at the top as well. DeJounte Murray, most popular guy on the slate. Trae Young, not getting as much ownership since he is questionable, but he's in a very good spot as well. Kevin Love is sort of a placeholder for whatever value opens up, I think. Ben Simmons is popular, fifth most popular guy on the slate. Shadon Sharp right behind him at sixth. So you can see once again, this is going to be a trend. you're going to mostly, your highest owned guys are mostly going to be players that are popular. And then you're just within individual lineups mixing in some lower owned guys. Now we can go back to the beginning and take a look at FanDuel as well. That was for DraftKings. Now, again, as a reminder, while we are pulling that up, $4.99 for your first week of lineup generator using the promo code NBA Treat. The promo code is above my head on the screen, or I guess off to my left, but above my head. It's also in the description. There's a link in the description below on YouTube. There will be a link on Twitter as well if you're watching this there. Now we're going to save 20 lineups on FanDuel and do the same thing, just looking through those. I mentioned it a lot, I think, yesterday, and it's something that is just important to keep in mind. If you have the ability, the time, the bankroll, whatever it may be, to play on multiple sites, you are going to be able to sort of naturally hedge what you're doing. Not in the sense that, oh, I'm playing a lot of DeJounte Murray on DraftKings, I want to make sure I don't play him on FanDuel, but in the sense that you're just naturally going to get exposure to different players. For example, 35% Jordan Poole here on FanDuel at 7,200. He's like 7,900 on DraftKings. He's really tough to get into lineups there. So it's kind of nice, to put yourself in the position where if Jordan Poole has a big game, at least you're live on one site without having gone out of your way to make, bad plays essentially. So that's always nice about playing both. Now, here at the top, we have a lineup that projects for 317 fantasy points, 155% aggregate ownership. So it projects pretty well, and the ownership isn't too crazy. It's relatively high, but again, just 13 game slate. You're still going to have some contrarian plays in here. 4.5%, 5K Kyle Lowry. Nothing wrong with that, even though he's not the most exciting guy. 4,700 for Bones Highland. He is going to look like a fantastic option. He's our highest owned guy right now at 75%. He's, like I said before, talking DraftKings, where he's a little bit more expensive. At the very least, Highland is going to project pretty well tonight for his salary, and that salary is even more favorable on FanDuel. Marcus Smart, 7,100, 12% owned. Jordan Clarkson at 6K. Slow start to the season for him, but he's only 7% owned. The playing time has been there. This is the kind of guy that I like getting to when he does have a couple of bad games and his ownership comes down, because he is still relatively inexpensive and he can obviously light it up. Paul George at 7%, 8,400, may or may not play tonight. If he does, he's going to look good. If he plays without Kawhi, he's going to look even better. Desmond Bane, obviously still no John Morant, so he's going to look good at 8,700. Talked about Ben Simmons in a bigger playmaking role. Christian Wood essentially backing up Anthony Davis, but also getting some minutes alongside him. Only 4,800 and power forward eligible. This is somebody else that I think if you want to play him some on DraftKings, it's fine as a contrarian play. He's a very good point per minute guy, but he looks much better on FanDuel where you have this power forward eligibility and where he is a little bit less expensive at 4,800. So as a result, he is projected for 26% ownership, but pretty solid play there. And then Şengün at 8,200, getting 18% ownership. No problems with that one. And we can try and find a little bit lower owned lineup. We're probably going to have to give up a bit in the way of projection, but here, still only giving up 8 points, 308 fantasy points, 95% aggregate ownership. We have a sub 8% owned CJ McCollum. We're getting to a chalk Bones Highland. We're getting to DeJounte Murray, who, again, will look a lot better if Trae Young is out, but looks good anyway. Shooting guard eligible here, 8,300. Not the same $7,300 price tag that we had on DraftKings, but still a good one. All-Star Thompson, 5% owned. Nice contrarian play there at a relatively expensive $6,700 price tag, but not overly expensive. Zach LaVine at 10%. Another guy, especially with small forward eligibility, that gives you a very high ceiling for that price tag. Norm Powell, Jaren Jackson Jr. at 11%. Kevin Love showing up at 1% here. Again, he is questionable. And then Isaiah Stewart, 5,700, 5% owned. Now, I mentioned earlier the Jalen Duren news that he missed shoot around. Bagley was with the starters. We still have Duren projected in for right now. Stewart should see at least a little bit of a bump if Duren is out. If he were to start at center, then the bump is going to be the biggest, but Bagley not the same level rebounder as Duren, neither is Wiseman. So either way, you should see a marginal bump in Isaiah Stewart's rebounding percentage without Jalen Duren alongside him if Duren does in fact miss this game. So that's something to pay attention to news-wise as well. Not only will Marvin Bagley, if he starts, become one of the best value plays, and not only can you gamble on James Wiseman as the backup if you wanted to do so, but Isaiah Stewart will look marginally better as well. And now finally, just to take a look at the overall ownership that we're getting to. Bones Highland, 75%, third highest owned guy on the slate, but we're still way over the field here in our 20 lineups. No issues with that. Good point per dollar value, relatively high ceiling, especially if guys get ruled out. Also gives you late swap flexibility, which is really important. Ben Simmons looks really good. DeJounte Murray, Lonnie Walker at only 4,600. He started the second half in place of Spencer Dinwiddie last game. I assume he's going to get the start with Dinwiddie out again tonight. Norman Powell at only 5,300 is going to look good. Jordan Poole, the big difference between DraftKings, we talked about that. He's projected for 15% ownership on FanDuel, so we are still coming in a bit over the field there. As far as the most popular players that maybe we're not getting to, at the top we have Lonnie Walker, Ben Simmons, Bones Highland, Christian Wood. All of those guys still showing up. Then we get to Jabari Smith. He's here at 25%. Trae Young is projected for about 20% ownership. We were getting to a lot of him on DraftKings where he's lower owned. Here on FanDuel, we're getting to about 15%. So not too far below the field, but not quite there. Same can be said for Şengün. So we don't really have any huge fade, for lack of a better word, at least right now. We're getting to chalk guys on FanDuel. But as you can see in those lineups that we looked at, that doesn't mean that we're playing lineups that are too chalky. We're still mixing in a couple of low-owned guys while still building around popular plays. So I think that's the big takeaway, as usual, is that there's a tendency to talk about popular players as if it's a really bad thing. They're still usually going to be pretty useful in building your lineups. So that's all I have for you today. Again, use that promo code NBA Treat. It's above my head. It's in the description below, whether you're watching on YouTube or on Twitter. Thanks for checking out the video, and good luck with your lineups tonight.